So good morning, everybody. I do hope I'm visible and audible. Welcome on behalf of the Energy Institute to this Energy Institute policy debate on UK energy priorities for 2021. For those who don't know me, I'm Michael Gibbons. I'm the chairman, as it says here, of Elexon, the company that, amongst other things, operates the central systems associated with the Balancing and Settlement Code. And it's my pleasure to be chairing this series of debates. Incidentally, I should mention that if any cyber disruption should affect my participation and chairing of this event, we are well organised enough to have a deputy chair standing by. Paul Spence of EDF is waiting to stand in, and I'm most grateful to him for doing so. For those very few of you who don't know about the Energy Institute, I should say that it's an independent network of professionals spanning the whole energy system. It convenes and facilitates debate, and the EI brings together expertise so that energy issues can be better understood, managed, and valued. Regulars to this series of debates will know that the concept here is that there is ample time for, and we very much want, questions and debate. So I absolutely want to encourage you to ask as many questions as you wish. So let me make sure that you know how you do that. As the instruction I think that you should have had already said, please click the chat icon at the bottom right-hand side of your screen and select all panelists from the drop-down menu. Type in your question and send it. It will then reach the speakers and me. And the procedure is that I will then direct the questions to the panelists and I will ensure that as many of them as possible are answered. And at the end, by the way, I'll be asking you to fill in a feedback questionnaire, but I'll remind you about that at the end. Now, I think you're all aware of the programme that we have. The key distinguishing feature of this series of debates is a small number of high quality speakers with ample time for questions and answers in a panel session, as I've said. And today we have a great example of that model. 3 top-notch speakers, as you can see, Keith, Emma, and the Minister. So no wonder that so many of you have registered and the numbers are still rising. We're up to 80, we'll expect rather more. But we do have a constraint today, and the constraint is an understandable one, that the Minister can only be with us for about 30 minutes, and that 30 minutes is from 11 to 11:30-ish. So we decided that to make the best use of his available time, we will constrain the questions after his remarks just to him at that point. So please, once again, ask questions, including of the Minister, as early as you like, and I will pass them to the Minister. Then, when the Minister has had to leave us around 11:30, we'll continue with questions and answers between Keith and Emma, and of course, your questions. So we plan to finish very soon after 12 o'clock, and I shall introduce you to each speaker in turn. So without further ado, let me introduce our first speaker, who is Keith Anderson. Keith is the Chief Executive of ScottishPower. He's responsible for all UK activity, including a £5.3 billion investment plan to 2022. Prior to ScottishPower, he was with RBS, Standard Life, and consulting with Ernst & Young. I always like to introduce people with something that's less well known about them. In Keith's case, he won a car at a corporate event and gave it back to be re-raffled for a charity, one of several for which he's worked. And he has 4 daughters, which may have something to do with the fact that he has been on the board of Powerful Women for some years and is still an ambassador for them. Keith, we're looking forward very much to what you have to say. Over to you.
Michael, look, thank you very much for that kind introduction. I always get a little bit worried when somebody says they're going to tell something to an audience that they might not know about me, or whether they dig up the fact that my first ever job when I was still at school was working in a shoe shop earning 79 pence an hour, which is a massive giveaway to my age and how old I am, rather than my inability to deliver a high quality service selling shoes. It's great to be here. It's a real pleasure, and it is brilliant to be on a panel alongside Emma and the Energy Minister, who's I know is joining us in a wee bit. Thanks very much to the Energy Institute as well for putting this on. These events have been, the ones that have been run up until now have been really good quality, and I'm hoping again the audience really enjoy this event as well. I think the timing of this event is fantastic. We've had some really positive news over the last couple of weeks. Part of it in relation to the energy sector and the future of the economy with the Prime Minister's 10-point plan, and now this week lots more positivity around the vaccine, and therefore a lot more hope about what we can do in terms of economic recovery and people's lives as we go into next year. So I think it's a great time to be having a debate about the future, not about the past, and about the optimism. Yes, there are challenges, but a lot of optimism about what we can do and what we can deliver going forward. So timing, I think, is brilliant. I think we're in a good place. One thing I will say is that all the way through the pandemic and all the way through this year, the level of engagement with the government and the level of engagement between the government, the industry, stakeholders, regulators has been incredibly good, incredibly positive. And again, I kind of hope we can carry that model on as we go forward over the next few years, because that will be critical and really, really important in terms of delivering everything we need to do and getting all of the benefits out of the future investment and shifting and moving hard towards achieving the ambition and the targets that we need to deliver net zero by 2050. And we've got the COP26 coming next year as well, which gives us a great focal point for really kickstarting a lot of the conversation and an awful lot of the activity we need to get started to get us on that pathway to 2050. So 2021 and moving into 2021 seems like a great time to be changing, if you like, our headspace, to be going from talking about crisis management to actually talking about practical steps to decarbonise, practical steps to shift beyond just renewable energy through to transport, through to heat, through to industry, and really, really driving that target and all of our activity towards net zero. There's a real momentum, I think, building up now in terms of the government's approach, and a real momentum, I think, seeing coming through from industry as well. The Prime Minister's commitment, his 10-point plan, the commitment to 40 gigawatts of offshore wind, I think has been fantastic. The commitment bringing forward the target to call time on the internal combustion engine, again, I think brilliant, bringing that forward to 2030, and so many people were asking for that. And I think it's worth just taking a minute to reflect on all of that and reflect on just how big a moment in time this is, and in years to come when we look back, and even more importantly, when the next generation look back, this could be seen as a real pivotal turning moment, a real shift in the momentum towards tackling climate change and putting us on the right route to delivering net zero by 2050. And I think there's a real serious intent right across business, right across the energy sector, across industry, across government, and a much, much better engagement all the way down through to communities and consumers in terms of everybody wanting the same thing and everybody wanting to drive everything in the same direction. I thought last week the national infrastructure strategy that was delivered as well shows again everybody starting to sing from the same hymn sheet in terms of decarbonisation and what we need to do and how we need to drive it forward. Lots of discussion as well about the new nationally determined contribution targets, and hopefully we'll see some announcements again on that in the very, very near future. So exciting times, brilliantly exciting time to be involved in energy policy. Not too sure I ever imagined myself saying that. I think in years gone by, Lots of policy geeks and policy wonks have always thought energy policy was incredibly exciting, but actually I think everybody thinks energy policy right now is phenomenally exciting because it goes way beyond energy. This goes to how people live their lives. It goes all the way through into transport, into heat, into industry. Energy policy is the green recovery. It's about how we run our economy. It's about how we deliver jobs, training opportunities, how we level up, and how we involve everybody right across the country. So it's a brilliant time to be involved in it all, and it's a brilliant time to be in this sector. It's also been, I think, brilliant, fascinating seeing since the launch of the 10-point plan, really interesting watching the reaction to it. We didn't really see too much of the usual, let's all argue about the target, let's all argue about whether it is or isn't ambitious enough. Actually, the conversation has shifted incredibly quickly to talking about how is it we do this, to talking about how do we make sure consumers have the confidence to actually switch to EVs? How do we make sure that it's done at best value for those consumers in the most efficient, effective way? We've seen a focus of concentration and conversation about how do we make sure communities and a lot of it around coastal communities for offshore wind, that they benefit from the transition, that local businesses can get involved in the ramp up of offshore wind and into the supply chain discussion. Lots of conversation about making the electricity network smart enough and resilient enough to be able to cope with the big changes that are going through it. And again, I think lots of positive conversation about that. My hope, my expectation is that this Prime Minister's plan, backed up by the Energy White Paper, which we're all expecting any day now, backed up by all of the investment we'll see coming through, will really get this the whole momentum shifting. It will get us moving properly and in the right way and at the right speed. One, to hit 2030 and all of the targets we've got for that, but then the whole pathway to net zero by 2050 as well. I think it's really, really kind of helpful, I think now, and I think the way we should approach this, that this becomes the decade of delivery, and that's what it's got to be about. All the talking is being done, the policies are being put in place, the frameworks are being put in place, and it now flips and has to flip incredibly quickly to actually delivery and going out and doing this, and that's what becomes important. So I'll just talk about three themes related to delivery. The first one is renewables, and obviously critical, I think, to everything. And this year coming is going to be a massive year for renewables, particularly for offshore wind. We have, I think, got a lot of confidence going into the year because we've shown time and time again that when big ambition and big targets are set, we can deliver against them. In fact, we can outperform them and we can bring forward the investment and deliver and over-deliver against people's expectations. We as a company, a few weeks ago, set out a £10 billion investment plan for the next 5 years in the UK, and at least half of that will be going into renewables, into offshore wind, and therefore really looking to lever the benefits of that across supply chain through taking on apprentices, graduates, through investment in infrastructure like port facilities and investment into local communities to bring the whole economy and all of those communities with us on this journey. And I don't think if you went back 10 years, I don't think anybody could have imagined or dreamt of where we would be today. But it shows you, and it should give us the confidence about where we can go in the future again. We're at a great point where renewable energy and offshore wind is already incredibly cheap, if not the cheapest form of generation out there. And we've got the possibility of bringing more technology and further development forward with the likes of floating offshore wind as well, and really push hard to push the boundaries of what's possible and what more we can deliver. Lots more for us to do in 2021 in terms of making and solidifying the credentials of the UK being the world leader in offshore wind. I think the ambition we're setting out does that. I think it shows that we're still leading the rest of the world, and that creates a great opportunity again in terms of jobs, in terms of manufacturing, in terms of supply chain. That, along with the government's announcements about funding for port infrastructure, again, I think that will really, really help build the whole momentum around the supply chain, around skills, around jobs, and around economic growth. So lots of positive stuff, lots of stuff for us to go after. Second theme talk about is transport, and transport has to be next on the list. Lots being done again already, but I think 2021 is the year where we really should start seeing a massive shift change in that transition and the investment towards the all-electric future for the transport sector as well. We've talked lots about bringing forward the switch away from the internal combustion engine. We've now got that target, the target everybody I think was looking for and asking for, and now it's down to the car sector, to the energy sector, to stakeholders to work together to go and deliver against that target and make sure that momentum shifts. And that's going to be massively about bringing customers, consumers, bringing the public with us, bringing citizens with us to help shift that change, both in terms of public transport and in terms of private transport and the ownership of a car. What's incumbent upon us is to make this easy for people. Okay, this can't be about forcing people, pushing people. We need to bring the whole country with us, and we need to make it the easy choice. It's up to us to drive down the cost of electric vehicles, to make sure the infrastructure is there, to make sure the confidence is there around charging, whether that's from home, whether it's in towns and cities, whether it's destination points, or whether it's on journey points. We need to make it obvious and easy that this is the right choice to make, so that we get to a point in time where when somebody's looking to change their car, why would you not buy an EV? It shouldn't be about convincing someone to buy an EV. The choice should be so obvious. The question would be, why wouldn't you buy an EV? And that's where we need to drive. And 2021, I think, is a real crucial year to start pushing in that direction. I think that tipping point in favour of EVs is coming. I think it will come very, very quickly. We've seen the price fall. We're seeing investment go into the infrastructure. And I think what's really good and really opportune moment for us in terms of the energy sector is, I think probably for the first time in history, you're seeing the world of energy and the world of transportation and the world of electricity all converging, all coming together. And that's what's needed to make this transition towards EVs going forward. We need to start anticipating that demand, making sure we've got everything ready for that demand coming through, and making sure we're looking at, thinking about and influencing usage patterns and behaviour patterns as we drive forward that investment. The third of the themes would be heat. We've done lots and lots in the decarbonisation of generating electricity. We see a really clear pathway for the future of transport and lots of investment coming through and driving forward to the transition to EVs. Heat has been the one area where there's been a bit more uncertainty about what do we want, what's the strategy, which direction we're going in. And I think that becomes a massive priority for 2021. We need to start delivering. We need to start saying, here's the choice, here's the direction, here's the strategy, because heat starts to play a massive part in our ability to get to all of the targets and to ultimately get to net zero by 2050. I think there's already a lot going on in terms of industry, in terms of looking at the market. There's technologies that already exist, and we need to start thinking about how do we do this rollout of electric heat pumps, because that's the available technology right now. That's the start point. It doesn't mean we exclude other technical solutions. It doesn't mean we exclude other ways of doing it. But what we can't do is sit and wait for some other answer to come along. We need to, again, start that delivery in 2021 and start shifting and start moving behind. And we need to plan it out in a way, again, that communities, that customers, that citizens don't feel like they're being left behind, or that they don't have an option, or they don't have a say in the choice as to how this is done. Because as we go through each of these steps, it becomes more invasive on people's lives and people's livelihoods, and it becomes ever more critical that we understand what they need, what they want, and we bring all of those people with us. We can't push people into this. We need to get people to want, to demand, to pull this transition and the change. I think the announcement in the 10-point plan about the 600,000 heat pumps by 2030 is good. That's a great start point. I think it says we're going to be serious about this, we're going to be ambitious about this, and we're going to get started on it. And I think that that was really, really important. And I think one of the most critical bits, I think, in the entire 10-point plan is setting out that roadmap and setting out that kind of ambition. So those would be the three big themes. Two things now, briefly, on what we need to do to help make sure those themes can be delivered and that we can make a success of this. The first of those is networks. And I kind of view networks, you know, if I use the analogy of our body, of a human being, yeah, we've got a brain, we've got a heart, we've got a set of lungs, just like we've got wind farms, we've got electric vehicles, and we'll have heat pumps. But what makes it all work, what makes the whole system of the body work, are the arteries, the veins, and the capillaries. And the energy system is exactly the same. What's going to make the offshore wind farms, the onshore wind farms, the solar plants, what's going to make the electric vehicles and the heat pumps work is the network. It's that transmission system and that distribution system. And we need to keep remembering about it, keep focusing on it, and make sure it's being redesigned, it's being more dynamic, it's capable of delivering that future, and we need to get that network ready today. You can't wait until all of this happens and then think about the network. We need to make sure the network's ready now, and we need to start redesigning it, reinvesting in it, rebuilding it, and delivering a network over the next 3 or 4 years that is actually fit for purpose for 2030, 2040, and ultimately 2050. And that's the one area of concern I've had all the way through the conversation this year, and it's the concern I've got at the back of my mind around the 10-point plan is there a mismatch between the ambition we're setting in the 10-point plan and the ability to deliver it through that network and the regulatory process and the planning process. So big focus for me as we shift to the end of this year and shift into 2021 is, have we lined up the ambition and the delivery, not just of government targets, but regulatory process, planning process, and all of the industrial process to create and deliver a network that's actually fit for purpose for the future. And then the second area is around communities and citizens and people. And I think, you know, if you reflect on the fact that COP26 is happening next year, we really do have a brilliant, brilliant platform and opportunity to truly engage with communities, with customers, with citizens around the entire green agenda, because that is critical to the delivery of net zero. We need to take all of those communities and all of those people with us in terms of this journey and in terms of decarbonisation for them and what it means for them. I think it's, you know, it's incumbent upon us, and it's quite difficult for us sometimes within an industry to move our thinking beyond the nuts and bolts and beyond the wind farm and beyond the technicalities of the system. But that's what we need to do. I think the climate assemblies were a great initiative. And again, I think we need to look at how do we carry on that kind of engagement and get people and feel and hear and see how motivated people are about this. And we need to look at that and relate it to the challenge we have. I mean, if I look at it from ScottishPower's perspective, in terms of our distribution system and our distribution network, it covers central southern Scotland, it covers the north of Wales and into the northwest of England. And I look at some of the towns, the villages, the communities in there, where you have, you know, at a UK level, a net zero 2050 target. You have at a Scottish Government level a 2045 target. You have at a Liverpool City region level a 2040 target. So centralised, one-size-fits-all policies, one-size-fits-all regulation frameworks, one-size-fits-all investment frameworks don't deliver for those differences. So we need to look at how do we take account of the differentials, how do we take account of those views, how do we link what we're doing in terms of investment into the system and the future of the system to the plans of a city, the plans of a local authority, the plans of a region in terms of what they want to do around economic recovery, around pollution, around air quality, around transport, because it all becomes integrated, it's all linked to the one system. So we need to think very carefully as we go through 2021. How do we get that model right? How do we make sure those voices are being heard? How do we make sure those people, those areas, those regions, those individuals feel like they're being listened to and feel like they're being involved in the decisions that we make? And that is a massive priority, I think, for next year. So, in summary, because I'm running out of time and I've probably run out of time, so apologies. But in summary, I think it's very clear what we have to do. I think we can look at next year and the route to 2030, 2040, 2050 with a huge amount of confidence, given what we've delivered and given the ambition we've set ourselves. I think we need to focus and look on the decade to 2030 as the decade of delivery. And I think we can look at all of that and say it's eminently achievable. We can do it and we can deliver it. So now, today, on the 1st of January 2021, it's let's get on, let's do it, let's deliver it. Thank you.
And thank you, Keith, very much indeed. And though you have just summarised, I thought I'd just reflect on a few takeaways of mine, not least because I see our growing number of participants arrived, in some cases anyway, after you started speaking. So I took away the headlines of the government 10-point plan you described as fantastic. You described the current period of time as pivotal. You referred to a decade of delivery. You developed your themes through the renewables area, through transport, emphasis there on making it easy to change your choice of vehicle, and in heat. I did pick up, however, on certainly one concern, and that is in relation to the network and the network investment, and whether or not that will be capable of delivering the 10-point plan. And we'll come back to that in questions, but please, I'm urging everybody to submit questions for all the speakers. That being said, let me now move on to our next speaker, who is Emma Pinchbeck. And Emma is Chief Executive of Energy UK, has been since July. I guess I observe that her career has personified in many ways modern British climate change and decarbonisation policy, in that she's been a senior level in Renewables UK and the head of climate change at WWF UK. She's well known in the industry for championing diversity and sustainability in the industry. And also, I'm bound to add, becoming a mother last year. Indeed, I believe that her baby has already visited more government officials than most of the UK population. Less well known even than that is perhaps the fact that she has been a competitive oarswoman. And for that, I believe she deserves our utmost respect. Emma, we're looking forward to hearing from you.
Thank you very much. I suspect I'm going to repeat a lot of what Keith has already said, which is no surprise if you've heard Keith and I speak before. But just to start with reiterating, it is a deeply exciting time to be working in the energy industry, and we're in the midst of this huge system transition, which is being driven by a technology revolution in the case of cheap, low carbon technologies, but also an increased pace of decarbonisation now being set by governments. And that government ambition is responding to both the opportunities of the green industrial revolution, but the now all too visible risks of climate change on economies. And in the UK, the setting of the net zero target by 2050, which happened just as I went on maternity leave, was an absolute game changer by this government and sent out a very clear message of ambition. We're waiting to see what the government's response to the 6th carbon budget advice will be in the next couple of weeks, but the rumours are that the ambition may even be tightened for 2030. And then on top of that, we've had the recent publication of the government's 10-point plan for a green industrial revolution. And whilst that plan will obviously be delivered in partnership with government from across economic sectors, I would like to point out that the energy sector drives and enables at least 9 out of 10 of the Prime Minister's objectives. And someone actually pointed out to me the other day that we also do our fair share of tree planting. We've been at the heart of UK progress on decarbonisation since the passing of the Climate Change Act. And just to remind you, we have reduced our emissions by nearly 70% in the power sector. In 2019, low carbon generation accounted for the majority of our energy needs. And in Q1 of this year, 62% of our energy generation came from low carbon sources, and over half of that was from renewables. And in June 2020, we went for over 2 months without using coal, and I worked on the coal phase-out campaign in my time at WWF, and I can tell you we did not necessarily believe it would happen that quickly when we were working on that, even at an optimistic NGO. And these successes and these records have largely been driven by a strong policy framework, long-term ambitions and targets, and those two things combined have given our private industry and our investors the confidence to invest. And when you look at what's happened, we often talk about offshore wind as the case study for this kind of policy making. The offshore wind success was driven by very strong carbon budget targets that necessitated decarbonising easy bits of the economy first, in this case, the power sector. And then the government built detailed policy underneath it to deliver on those targets. And the CFD set of auctions has created a really stable market environment and a price signal for our investors, which has now delivered a whole new industry and delivered cost reductions far more radical and far quicker than we thought possible when we originally designed the policy. But what I would say we've learned through the process of offshore wind is that investment isn't just about either cheap pounds per megawatt hour or indeed saving on emissions. It's also about building a new industry. And the earlier we invest in new industries, the more of the economic and industrial benefits we keep in the UK. And 90% of the government's investment in offshore wind went to places outside the southeast of England. And I'm sure some of you have seen those new industrial hubs in places like Hull and Grimsby, coastal communities that have been transformed by the new infrastructure there, and support for a UK supply chain and local jobs. So now when we think about green policy, you can see governments not just thinking about the environment, but also industrial policy and an economic opportunity. And indeed, kind of China's recent announcement of emissions cuts for 2030 is about geopolitics and their presence on the international stage, but also, I think, an opportunity to lead on this new industrial revolution, as much as it's also the right thing for them to be doing for the planet. And this understanding is also what's underpinning the debate on the concept of a green recovery in the UK from the pandemic. And it gave government the confidence to push something like the 10-point plan. As far as we're concerned in the energy sector, we sustain over 738,000 jobs already. And when you think about the next phases of the energy transition and decarbonisation, we are going to be going into many more areas of the economy, as Keith has said. And those areas are by nature spread right across the country and involve many more kinds of jobs. So if you think about changing over our heating systems, if you think about installing EV charging points, if you think about manufacturing electrolyzers, there's going to be someone working in the energy sector in every constituency of the country. There are something like 100,000 jobs predicted for just doing energy efficiency alone. And as Keith said, the transition also means that the traditional boundaries between economic areas or energy vectors are collapsing. So we see heat, transport and power increasingly as one problem, and the energy industry is creeping into the whole economy as it decarbonises. You can see a world coming where electric vehicles are offering customers energy storage as well as mobility, where wind farms are making green molecules for industrial heat as well as clean electrons for domestic lighting, and where data is a commodity. And so when you look forward to 2030 and beyond, we're going to need to think not just about jobs, but also skills and how we get them, and particularly new skills like digital skills, and also how to do that whilst upskilling an existing workforce. And as ever, and I would say this, if we want to recruit skilled candidates, I've got a form, if we want to recruit skilled candidates, we do need to recruit really widely from the population, and we also need to inspire people. And whether that's apprentices, as Keith mentioned, or graduates, or workers looking for new challenges from other industries, We need to bring them with us with more than just, the day job. And we have a mission now in decarbonisation, which is aspirational and exciting, but I believe we also need to take action to make sure we look like the public that we serve. And that will be expected, certainly by the next generation coming through. That's why we've got diversity targets for the sector deal for offshore wind and for nuclear, and why we welcome initiatives like Powerful Women, which was mentioned at the beginning. I'd also say that if there is an upside at all from the pandemic, it's that it's given us an opportunity to look at how we work and not just what we do. And for the jobs that we can do this for, flexible working and better work-life balance will also enable us to bring more people through. And speaking of the pandemic, this has been an extraordinary period for the perception of the energy industry with government and for fantastic engagement with central government. And, thanks to the Minister for that. And if you poll energy customers that now, public trust in the energy industry is at a real high. And on top of that, as Keith mentioned, we've also had a citizens' assembly, which showed that when you talk to people about decarbonisation, they think it's necessary, they're excited by the challenge, and when they understand what's coming, they're recommending really strong measures, certainly stronger than industry or government was thought possible. And so there's also this public moment to build on this understanding of the energy industry again as a kind of public service and public good, and taking that into policy as we get more personal. But that does require some policy. We can't just do that with market instruments alone. And there is this moment to build detailed and ambitious policy coming in the autumn, as well as a kind of public moment, because we've got an energy white paper still expected, we've got a heat and building strategy in the new year, we've got a transport decarbonisation strategy, and maybe even something like an energy bill. There's also this great political moment to do it. And if you think about the timeline we've got now on decarbonisation, it's roughly 1 to 2 industrial life cycles or technology life cycles, that's 1 to 2 investment life cycles. And if you think about the sequencing of events, that basically means we have this Parliament and next Parliament to get the policy instruments and the frameworks in place to deliver the industrial change over the next 30 years. And so, in terms of the detail of what we're still looking for, the Committee on Climate Change thinks that whilst we've done a good job on power to date, we still need 2 to 3 times the electricity we have today for the net zero economy in 2050. So we need policy stability to unleash even more private capital and give the industry room to innovate. Learning the lessons from offshore wind, as Keith said, we need enabling infrastructure, whether that is key infrastructure, whether it's vessels, whether it's networks of cables on wires, or even things like smart metering. All of that needs to be in place. We also need to learn our lessons of offshore wind and invest early in the new technologies that we haven't heard about yet, whether that's nuclear, BECCS, CCUS, hydrogen and storage, and the detail for how we're planning on funding them. The second thing that we're looking for is to note that this isn't just about power, it is now a whole system challenge, and getting those pieces to work best will happen if the system is as smart and as flexible as possible. And by doing a smarter and more flexible system, we also know that we save consumers money. So we need to be investing in the markets and infrastructure to enable that. We also, as Keith said, need to think about the scale of ambition for homes and transport. We've seen bits of that in the 10-point plan, but it would be really good to have the detail. And particularly, we want consumer incentives on EVs, as again, Keith mentioned, but also to make the thinking on buildings and heat greater than the sum of technology parts. A massive retrofit programme that covers energy efficiency, heat and microgeneration. Again, a kind of whole system thinking in microcosm for the building space. And lastly, and I would say this, but it's absolutely true, critical to all of the above is having a flourishing and vibrant retail sector. We need our energy retailers to be able to have the financial room to invest in innovation and in their future consumers. And that means markets working properly, whether that's understanding what's coming on carbon pricing after we leave the EU, or having flexibility markets that work and allow innovation. And it also means our retailers delivering positive consumer outcomes and protection for vulnerable customers. Again, we do need to bring everyone with us on cheaper bills, cleaner air, greater protections, more choice, but also to look after the most vulnerable consumers and make sure they benefit from the net zero challenge. And we were delighted to launch a vulnerability commitment from the sector just this week. The last thing on policy is a point about how we do it, not what we do. And this is a massive whole economy challenge. So we do need to look at how we evaluate policy across the piece. Now, the Treasury's net zero review was really welcome, but it didn't quite go far enough. And it would be good to see more thinking from them about, say, a net zero test that applied across the whole economy. And then if you think about machinery of government more broadly, Keith talked about regional planning, but we could also look at a minister in central government beyond BEIS to join up the pieces across the economy, which is not to knock the fantastic work that BEIS has done, but more to illustrate how big the challenge coming for us is. So I'll finish and say, I've been thinking about inflection points, like you do, for the energy sector, and I think we're in the middle of one. If you think about what the steam engine did in terms of driving the Industrial Revolution, or the kind of radical change in how we organise society that came about once we had the combustion engine and individual cars, or in the UK, what North Sea oil and gas did to how we structured our markets and our industry, you can see that this moment with what's happening on the demand side and the transformation of our supply side is that sort of inflection point again. And to come back to what I said at the beginning, it feels incredibly exciting, but with so little time left to tackle the climate crisis and with a global opportunity as host of the COP, it's absolutely right that our actions today need to be huge and optimistic and have immediate consequences.
So thank you very much indeed for that, Emma, and a very wide-ranging talk. We're just waiting for the Minister. He should be due with us any moment. In fact, I think it's possible that he has just arrived. And I'm just going to check that he's there. Yes, he is. So can I go straight to introducing the Minister? It's a great pleasure to welcome you and thank you for your time, Minister. I'm introducing you as the Minister of State for Business, Energy and Clean Growth, which you've been since July 2019. You've been the MP for Spelthorne since 2010. I might say of your background that given that you've been a King's Scholar at Eton, a double-starred first at Cambridge,
I don't think there was
a Kennedy Scholarship to Harvard, and a PhD in economic history, I would say that your audience can safely assume that we're in the company of an intellect to be reckoned with.
Thank you very much.
You've written several books. You believe in markets, road pricing, and a small estate, or at least you did until this year. Well, you were well known in your past for winning the University Challenge in 1995 and equally famously admitting on air that you'd forgotten an answer. Less well known, perhaps, is that your first name, Kwasi, is derived from the Ghanaian name meaning born on a Sunday. I'll leave it to you to declare, if you wish, when you were born. But, Minister, we are most grateful to have you.
Thank you very much.
Looking forward to hearing from you on the 10-point plan and the UK energy priorities for 2021. Welcome.
Thank you very much. You're quite right about the naming system in Ghana and the Ashanti region. But I want to clarify that I was actually born on a Monday, so that's something that is of interest to some people, I'm sure. But thank you for your very fulsome introduction. And I just wanted to say that I think we're in a very, very exciting place in the energy space. I'm very pleased that the Prime Minister announced his 10-point plan on the 18th of November this year. And I thought it was an innovative and ambitious programme. And not only does it attempt, I think, convincingly, to set us on a path to the net zero ambition, net zero emissions by 2050, but also it incorporates an ambitious programme of job creation that will support levelling up and up to 250,000 jobs across the UK. Now, the upshot of the plan in financial terms is that we will mobilise £12 billion of government investment. But really the key to this, and you mentioned, Michael, that I like markets, the key to this how we're going to reach success is by unlocking up to 3 times as much, maybe more than 3 times as much, private sector investment by 2030. And this is something that's already happened, for instance, in the development of our strong offshore wind sector. I think that it would be good if you could learn more about the plan, if you want to, on the government website on gov.uk. But today, I think it makes sense for me just to highlight what I think are the key parts that are most relevant to the energy sector and to my brief. As many of you will know, the United Kingdom is already a world leader in offshore wind power. And it was striking to me that the first point in the Prime Minister's plan was that we would quadruple our capacity of offshore wind to 40 gigawatts by 2030. And of course, this not only has huge impact on powering the homes that we have, powering the homes today, but also it will support the creation of tens of thousands of new jobs. The other point that, the next point rather, that the Prime Minister made as point 2 of the plan was all about hydrogen. It committed £500 million in the first instance for low carbon hydrogen production across the decade. And it set out, I think, an ambitious but achievable target of 5 gigawatts by 2030. And not only did we set out that, did the Prime Minister set out that target, he also suggested, in I think a very exciting development, he suggested that we would trial a hydrogen neighbourhood, a hydrogen village, and a hydrogen town, potentially before the end of the decade. So that was all very exciting. We also appreciate that the electricity system will have to grow and indeed double in size by 2050. And there was a commitment in the Prime Minister's 10-point plan to nuclear power. And he suggested, rightly in my view, that nuclear power can provide a reliable source of low-carbon electricity baseload and a consistent supply to match or offset the intermittent nature of renewables. So point 3 of the plan actually pointed the way to developing large and smaller scale nuclear reactors, and also pledged for more R&D for AMRs, advanced modular reactors. Point 4 of the plan received the widest media coverage and related to the fact that we fully intend to end the sale of new petrol and diesel cars and vans by 2030, while also helping the automotive sector make that transition with £500 million to support the electrification of UK vehicles and their supply chains. We also have committed £1.3 billion to accelerate the rollout of charging infrastructure, and that often gets cited as something which is prohibiting the development of the market, the lack of charging points, but we've committed capital to that. The plan talked also about carbon capture, usage and storage. It talked about the absolute necessity of making our buildings, our homes, more energy efficient, and not just our homes, but also public buildings as well. And last, but famously not least, the 10th point of the plan, I think, was very exciting because it talked about innovation and green finance. And that obviously dovetails very nicely with what the Chancellor of the Exchequer had said earlier in the month about TCFDs, about mandating TCFDs, and also about the possibility of, for the first time ever in this country, of a sovereign green bond. So over the last, literally just a few weeks, we've seen huge strides, I think, a very ambitious set of policies and aspirations, which I hope and believe will drive our commitment to net zero emissions by 2050 and actually help us realize that goal. 2020, I think, has been a really good year for the energy sector. I look back on the beginning of the year and look at the beginning of the year, we were very early stages on hydrogen. I think we've made great strides in that. I think we've made great strides in CCUS. I was delighted by the Chancellor's statements with regard to the Green Sovereign Bond and also mandating TCFDs. Very excited by the Prime Minister's time. And I think 2020 has been a really remarkable year for the energy sector. Looking forward to 2021, we have a number of strategies that we wish to publish. The heat and building strategy, I hope will see the light of day in the first quarter of next year. We have a net zero strategy, and we also will have a hydrogen strategy, which I'm particularly excited about. And this all will flow from the publication of the Energy White Paper, which, as I said to the Environment Audit Committee yesterday, I fully expect and hope we can see that publication this year before the new year. So lots and lots is happening. We've got a number of priorities, key priorities, particularly the COP26 next year, which we'll be hosting in Glasgow, and also, in fact, the presidency of the G7, which we can use as a platform really to help drive commitments and ambitions in reducing carbon emissions. So thank you very much for hosting me this morning, and I'm very grateful for the fulsome introduction, Michael, that you gave me just a few minutes ago. So thanks.
Well, that was a great pleasure, Minister. As I understand it, you're able to stay with us at least for
Absolutely, I'll be very happy to do that.
Questions. I take the opportunity to urge everybody watching, and we have a record attendance of well over 100.
Fantastic.
To ask questions, and they're coming in. And the first one that I've chosen is about some aspects of the 10-point plan. And the questioner says, some of these plans cost money, more money than at least up front for the current positions of end consumers. They're referring in the question to purchasing electrical vehicles where the upfront cost is higher than non-electric vehicles, and alternatives of various sorts to natural gas heating, including hydrogen and electricity for that matter. So it's about upfront costs to consumers at a time when many have lost their jobs as a result of the pandemic, and the inequalities in society seem to have widened. So, Minister, could you comment on how you see that working out? How do you see that playing out?
I think that's a fair question. I mean, I think people are under a lot of stress. All I would say is that the government is providing a great deal of support, not only to the economy, but also in respect of the green recovery. I mean, I need only point out that, the Green Homes Grant was launched only 3 months ago, and that commits people can get up to £5,000 or 2/3 of their measures, or in the case of people who are in fuel poverty and have more straitened circumstances, they can get up to £10,000 that will pay for 100% of the work that they want to do. So there is considerable government support. With EVs in particular, we've seen the costs of those go down over the last 5 years, and I think we'll reach a point where those costs will be very competitive, and people are already buying EVs. We've got a point. We reached a point where obviously the running costs of the electric vehicle are much lower than that of traditional cars, traditional vans, which rely on the internal combustion engine. And we're hopeful that we will reach a tipping point soon where it'll be much more economically advantageous to buy an electric vehicle. And I think we're getting to that point. Nearly people are already buying EVs in quite considerable numbers.
Thank you for that. The next question, it relates to hydrogen, which the questioner has picked on out of the 10-point plan, and you mentioned particularly. The questioner believes that you have, at a previous conference, talked about the fact that initially, when you were appraised of the hydrogen position, you were a little sceptical, or certainly more sceptical then than you are now, but you've clearly changed your emphasis, at least on this, and they're very supportive. It would be really interesting if you could tell us what was it about the hydrogen situation that caused you to change your mind?
I think that's a brilliant question. And I think, when I started the role in July 2019, it seems like a hugely long time ago, but it was only 18 months ago, if that. I think there was a lot more, we've done a lot more work on hydrogen. People will have noticed that across the world, it's certainly across the EU and Germany, they've produced their own hydrogen strategies. And actually hydrogen, the production of hydrogen, both green hydrogen produced by electrolyzers, and also blue hydrogen, which is a function of methane reformation, as we all know. Both of those are things that we can do in Britain. And it was increasingly obvious to me as we thought about it that CCUS, carbon capture, doesn't really make sense on its own. I think if you're going to have carbon capture, why wouldn't you capture the hydrogen and essentially produce blue hydrogen? So talking to officials, reading about the subject, made me much more bullish about the possibilities of hydrogen, and particularly the ability of the UK to produce both green and blue hydrogen, which is a pretty unique position to be in. There are very few countries actually that are committed to doing both.
Thank you for that. And as a past chairman of the CCSA, might want to come back to you on CCUS, but next question on the list is about the white paper to which you referred. And obviously the question is interested to know when it will be expected, but perhaps more importantly, given as you know that it's been delayed for a very long time, possibly years, are you able to give us an assurance that it will contain, as white papers should, a clear statement of government intent and provide more answers, in the words of the questioner, than questions?
Well, look, this is my view of a white paper. It does not have, and I use the word carefully, but it does not have a sort of scriptural authority. It's not going to be the last word in energy policy. And people who are looking for 100% certainty may well find that it does pose questions. I think what a white paper does most effectively is give a very, very clear set of directional guidance. It will provide that. It'll set out our approach, our strategic approach to meeting net zero by 2050. But if people are looking for a 30-year kind of Soviet-style detailed plan about how we can get from here where we are now in 2020 to 2050, I think they may be disappointed, because that's not the job of the white paper. The white paper directional steers, clear a set of a sort of intellectual approach or method in which we can solve the problem, but it won't give a granular year by year roadmap in the way that the old Soviets used to have their 5-year, and even theirs was only a 5-year plan. They never had 30-year plans, and it would be impossible for any government to do that.
Thanks for that. If I may, I'll take Chairman's prerogative just to follow up and press you on that. If, as you say, it's going to be perhaps more exploratory than most people assumed it would be, why has it taken so long? Why is so long a delay?
I have lived this, so I can tell you exactly what happened. I came in 2019 in July, and the white paper had gone to write round and was delayed, and there was a new government. And we actually had a debate, and I thought we could publish it immediately, but of course there was a summer recess, and then we had the prorogation battle, and then we had the general election, and then we had a budget, and then we had the COVID response to deal with. And so all these supervening events essentially pushed the publication of the white paper back. But I think we're in a position now when we can see its publication. I fully hope that it will be published this year. Now, people can say, well, these things shouldn't have delayed it, but I'm just presenting the facts as they were. And these events, which some of them were unforeseen, meant that the publication was delayed.
Thank you. And moving on to another question, and this one from Sarah Vaughan of E.ON and indeed a non-executive director at Elexon. Does the Minister believe that the institutional structure we currently have in place is suitable for a net zero world? She goes on to say, particularly if one looks at this in a whole energy system way, where can any central coordination that is needed best lie?
So there's a big debate about this, and clearly I think that institutions will have to evolve, to meet the net zero commitment. I think it would be naive to say that everything that we set in place 20 years ago is exactly the right thing for meeting the challenge of 2050. And that's an ongoing debate. I think the white paper does touch on some of these issues, but it's something that I hope that we can engage in conversation about. But do we have all the answers in 2020 for 2050? No, we don't. I think it would be an arrogant and naive minister who would suggest that we do.
Thank you. So let's return to the CCS question. The white paper, the 10-point plan refers to 4 new CCS clusters, an additional 2 to be exact, all for £1 billion. Now, my recollection of the sums and indeed the funding arrangements for previous competitions, sadly not successful, prompts me to ask if you think that is enough.
So
£1 billion for 4.
This always comes up in debates. This always comes up in debates in this country. They always say, and I noticed a comment in the bar, oh, well, the government's spending 10 billion and the Germans are spending 30 billion, so they're better and they're more committed. It's not about government spending. It's about trying to attract private capital. If you look at the development of offshore wind, we spent something like £94 billion, but that wasn't government money. It was the government that set up an auction process through which private capital actually was deployed. And all the offshore wind farms that you see in the North Sea were deployed and paid for by private capital. So when people go on and on and on about this isn't enough money, I would say that that's not how you achieve success in this. You achieve success by setting up mechanisms by which private investors can then put their own hands in their pockets and pay substantial amounts to realize this infrastructure. So it's a foolish debate to say, oh well, we're paying X amount and the Germans or the Swedes or whoever it is are paying 3X amount. That's not how you achieve success. You achieve success by attracting the vast resources of private capital, and we have done this very successfully in offshore wind.
Thank you very much. I'm not sure how you're doing for time, but we've got lots of questions.
Well, I'll have one more question, I'm afraid. I mean, I'd love to stay for much longer, but I've got other commitments this morning, unfortunately.
Yes, no, I know, and you came from a previous one as well. I'm aware of that. I'm just looking at what I think might be the best question to ask of this. Yes, so what are the key activities? This is from Rupal Patel. What are the key activities that need to happen following the energy white paper being published later this year, as you said, to further support initiatives in the energy sector? What are you looking for by way of response to the publication of the plan and the white paper?
So I know I'm looking forward to a robust debate like the one we're having. I mean, I wish I had more time to answer the questions. I mean, someone's saying, oh, that's the reason why we don't have a supply chain, because we haven't spent the money. But people around the world, I know that is a failing, but people around the world look at the capacity, the installed capacity in offshore wind, and which we have 35%. I mean, I can't think of the last time the UK had 35% share in any industry. I mean, you'd have to probably go back to before the First World War to think of an industry where. So there've been huge successes in this, and as I keep saying, the success has been achieved through a dialogue with business, and actually a dialogue with entrepreneurs, with innovators, and with researchers, and that's exactly the kind of conversation that I want to pursue with people in the sector and in this sort of forum. I think it's a really good arena for debate.
So, Minister, thank you very much indeed for answering these questions as fully and indeed as passionately as you have done.
Thank you.
And we're grateful to you. As I say, we've attracted a very large audience for this, and the debate will go on with the other two speakers after you've left us. But I do want to thank you for joining us and for your frankness in giving those answers. I cannot promise that we shall not ask you again to join us. So if you're written
the questions, I think it's really good that we have these fora, and there's some excellent questions, and I wish I could have stayed more to answer more of them.
Well, our next one, I think, will be in April, and we plan to focus on the white paper, of course, and it should
I'd be very happy to talk
published
about the white paper.
That would be excellent. 15th of April.
Thank you.
It's a pleasure. Thank you for joining us. So at this point, can I invite both Emma and Keith to unmute themselves and to put themselves on the screen so that we can continue with the Q&A for what remains of our time, something like 35 minutes. I guess the opening question to both of you, and yes, you're both on screen now, is would you like to take the opportunity to comment on, to pick up on anything, to emphasize anything, or to disagree with anything that the Minister said? Ladies first, Emma.
Thanks for that. Look, I'm going to pick up on the point about market frameworks and say that I think the Minister is largely, they're not entirely right. Not that it's a very good idea in my job to correct a Minister all the time, but if you think about what's happened with offshore wind, again, we primed the investment there. So, there were contracts before the CFD auction. We kind of invested in R&D at early stage. There was government investment in the early stage of the technology, and given where we are on hydrogen and CCUS, we probably do need some public capital going into the technologies that we know that we need to bring forward. And the second thing I'd say is there are going to be bits of energy policy where it's not particularly commercially interesting to do it or do it immediately in the order that we might want to for decarbonisation. And, if you think about EV charging, for example, the market will do a lot of that because as the energy industry, we can see the attraction of energy services from EVs and that transport shift that Keith talked to. But it's not going to be us that goes necessarily to like far-flung rural areas or thinks about where to put charging for the rollout of decarbonisation of freight or that kind of more infrastructure-led sort of investment. And I'd argue that there's a case again for government to do that kind of thing. But overall, I think he's right when you think about how quickly we need to decarbonise and how much time we have and what's happened previously, effectively it's an economic shift which is about the movement of a huge amount of capital. And the Committee on Climate Change would say this, and it's going to need to be both public and private. And the private sector historically has moved quicker than the government has. What we need, though, is the kind of frameworks and policy certainty. So once we're through that first technology innovation phase, getting the market frameworks right will enable stuff. And I would say that's what we're looking for in the white paper most of all, is some clarity where we've got barriers to innovation, where markets aren't quite working, where there's a kind of gap for government investment. It's those kinds of enabling actions we're looking for, not necessarily for government to do the whole thing. There you go. That was a bit of a ramble, but I thought it was interesting how strong the Minister was on that. And I just wanted to reframe it slightly.
Yes, thank you. Keith, do you want to pick up the same question? What did you think of what the Minister said?
I kind of touch on some of the stuff Emma's picked up on as well. So the two comments I'd make on what I heard and the questions. Number one on money and investment. In principle, I completely agree with the Energy Minister. I don't want government money. The last thing in the world I want is government investing in wind farms or government investing in even in the network and the core energy infrastructure. It's just not needed, and I think it's a complete waste of public money if you do it. The model should be to make investment in the UK look attractive, seem attractive, and you'll see a flood of investment. All around the world just now there are big investment funds, infrastructure funds looking for a home to put their money. And I want the government to focus on, and working with their own policy frameworks, with regulators and with other bodies in the UK, is how is it you make the UK look attractive, and the money and the investment will flood here. So if I was to give the Energy Minister a comment back, I agree with them in principle. Don't want the government investing and don't want the government money. But the challenge for the government is, and if you put this in my world, in the world of Iberdrola and ScottishPower, we've announced a €75 billion investment plan for the next 5 years. 10 billion of that's coming to the UK. Why is it not 20 billion, or why is it not 30 billion coming to the UK? And the challenge there is about attractiveness of investment frameworks, and it's about speed of delivery, and all the mechanisms. So we've set great ambition, we've set great targets. Where's the speed of delivery? What's changing in regulation and planning and in other processes to allow us to get the hell on with delivering all of this ambition? And because the faster you can get to delivery, the more investment you'll attract into the UK. And then the second point I would make, which is about the white paper, which again, I'm not that bothered about the fact that the white paper's been delayed or it's been pushed back in time, etc. Okay, I think given where we are now, a white paper now is probably good timing, because we've had the 10-point plan, so we've set the headlines, we've had the headlines. The white paper's the strategy, and then we can get on with the delivery mechanisms, and that's the order that should come in. And I think the timing for it now is actually probably absolutely perfect. I suspect had a white paper come out 9-10 months ago, we'd be in the process of sitting down and rewriting the bloody thing. So actually, in fact, the delay for the 101 reasons it's happened is actually probably pretty beneficial given where we are now.
And Michael, there's a point on it was effectively industrial strategy in the chat saying, if you just go kind of the market mechanisms approach, then you don't get the supply chain and the jobs in country, and that's and we should learn our lessons from that. And again, up to a point that's true, and as I said in my remarks, that's a clear role for government. There's enabling infrastructure that the government could invest in that would help the market move more quickly. And Keith talked to networks, but there's also as I said, literal physical keys for vessels for offshore wind and investments into local communities, so that when this is a global industry now, a global challenge for decarbonisation, when people are looking at the UK market, it looks attractive not just in terms of our frameworks and our investment frameworks, but also in terms of the physical infrastructure we have. And it's often that
sorry, Emma, you froze at least as far as I was concerned. So perhaps you could retrack a sentence and begin again.
Yeah, it's to say that there is potential opportunity for government investment or thinking on the enabling infrastructure, and not just the markets, and particularly at community level or around where we're planning on building things like hydrogen hubs or offshore wind, to think that through, and indeed invest in it if necessary. Yeah. And on the point about, how do you get supply chain and jobs? It's good to see more thinking of that in the industrial strategy. But the lesson from wind is that we had the technologies early in the UK, and we took a decision to allow them to develop in other markets and then pick them up further down their kind of development curve. That's been really good in terms of pounds per megawatt hour. We've got a world leading industry. But if government wants to keep more of the industrial benefits in the UK, they can invest early in early stage technologies, and that's the point about R&D for some of the stuff coming. So it's just to directly address another question in the sidebar.
Yeah, and I just sorry, Michael, just briefly picking up on that. Look, I agree with everything Emma said, but I think we're starting to see it happen. And the minister referenced it as well, which is actually the UK content of an offshore wind farm been growing and growing and growing and growing, and it's actually at a pretty high level historically for any industry in the UK. So I think we shouldn't beat ourselves up unnecessarily. It's not been a failure. We're getting there. But I think real signs of optimism, because if you take the northeast of England, where there's the investment in the blade factory that's come through, there's talk about investment. There's now talk about that being a centre for carbon capture and storage, talk about it being a centre. And it shows you when you start to make And we've said this all along, you start to make those critical investments in the core infrastructure around port infrastructure, supply chain starts to flock and come around it. And so all of a sudden in the Northeast, you're talking about not only blade factories, but whole offshore factories. You're talking about hydrogen centres, you're talking about CCS centres. And it shows you people will flock to an area. And if we get that right, and it's about picking those 3 or 4 strategic locations in the UK, it will grow and grow and grow.
Pete, thank you very much. I think you've also covered Jeremy Catt's question, which was about, well, there are some great ideas, but will there be financial support? I'm taking it that you already fully answered that there's plenty of financial support available in the market for these opportunities. I thought we might move on and in a sense backwards to, I wanted to 2 things. One, from each of you that you said that were concerns of yours, at least for suggestions for improvement. Keith, in your context, since I have you on the screen, you talked about your one concern, or at least a concern, of the potential mismatch with the 10-point plan of the importance of the network and the need for more investment in the electricity network. Could you unpack that a bit? Could you say a bit more about what your concern is there?
Okay.
And then we'll go to Emma on hers.
Yeah, I mean, and it goes back to the kind of slightly flippant, daft analogy I use with the human body in terms of your I think the thing with energy, when people talk about energy and people talk about your net zero, there's a completely understandable focus on wind farms, on solar plants, on electric cars, and on heat pumps, because those are the things people see, touch, and feel. Okay, and all we're, one of the things we're constantly highlighting and trying to highlight is it's fine. That's all good. It's all brilliant, and God Almighty, we absolutely need the investment to come through and the installation program to come through. But it's all absolutely, completely meaningless and useless unless you have the ability to connect it all together to create that system. Okay, and the truth is, the system, as in the network and the distribution system, was never designed for all of what we're doing. We've been adapting it and changing it as we go along, and it's coping with stuff just now. But we need to ramp up the pace, because we've created a 2050 target in legislation. We've now created a new target for electric vehicles, and we're creating new additional targets around heat and momentum around all of these other deliveries as well. Okay, and we need to get our mentality beyond, I think, talking about anticipatory investment as if there's some risk. Okay, right. Net zero is a fact. 2030 for switching from internal combustion engine to EVs is a fact. Heat pumps is a fact. We're turning hydrogen into a fact. So where's the risk in investing in the network? We need to get on and develop that network now. And my view, really strong view, is if you do that now, you plan it out, you have the strategy for it, you start to deliver and design the network now, it will be 100 times more efficient in terms of an investment than doing it piecemeal as stuff comes along. The more you plan it up front and roll it out up front, the more effective and efficient it will be in delivering a network that's fit for the future. Okay, now, I'm not going to throw a ton of criticism at regulators or other bodies. We always have a bit of a ding dong with our regulatory friends. That's fine. It's just part of the process. But to be fair to all of those bodies, they've been working for the last 5 to 10 years in a different world. They've been working in a world of austerity economics, of cutbacks, of low cost. Okay, but that world's gone. And so we need to reshape and rechange the way all of those processes work. It's a little bit like the planning system, and we have I think it's, if I remember off the top of my head, it's an 18-month timeline to allow the Infrastructure Planning Commission to review the planning decision for an offshore wind farm. Magically, every offshore wind farm takes 18 months to go through it because it becomes a default. Okay, and the regulatory processes become a default. We need to look at how do we modernise, adapt, change, make more agile all of those background processes, because we're shifting from a world of austerity politics and austerity economics to a world of huge investment, huge opportunity, huge ambition. And those processes have to adapt, change, and be able to deliver that. And that, to me, is absolutely critical to resolve next year, because unless you resolve it next year, we will just see delay, delay, delay. Simple example, right now, there are a bunch of offshore wind projects that have been consented, approved, gone through the auction process, and they're probably sitting with grid connection dates of 2030, right? If we want 40 gigawatts of offshore wind by 2030, where the hell's the grid connection coming from? And you, as is the wonderful way of the world of getting stuff through the system, you can't wait to answer that in 2025. The answer to that has to be in 2021. We need to know how we're doing it, how we're delivering it, and how we're getting there next year. So that, to me, is, despite all the focus and attention being about shiny new EVs and lovely big wind turbines and lovely electrolyzers, which I'm sure look really beautiful and people love them, yeah, we need to focus on the hidden, slightly boring, slightly dull topic of make sure the bloody network works.
Very, very loud and clear. So moving to Emma, what I picked up what you said was that you felt that there were machinery of government changes, and the examples were a Treasury net zero test and a minister to join these things up. I just wonder, in both cases, would you explain more what you meant, how that would work, why it's necessary, what the problem with the existing position of machinery of government is that this would solve? And maybe we'll ask Keith to comment on it as well. But Emma first.
Okay, so I should add that this is one of those subject areas where I tend to bleed into my views as well as Energy UK's views. Though, you know, I think there's more thinking in this space now. So on the economy, just to go one step higher, and Keith just mentioned it, when you think about the decarbonisation challenge, it is a kind of technology industrial shift, but happening up against really tight environmental thresholds, which require kind of top-down targets because there's a timeline attached. And the challenge is both trying to enable the market to work and do its thing and kind of allow the transition to happen in a sensible order, but also trying to get that done in line with restrictions, you know, in terms of resources or in terms of finances or in terms of time. And that's really, really challenging for policymakers and for industry, because we tend to think, you know, from the bottom up or from where we are now in government out, and we're having to do both at the moment. And the second thing I'd say about it is politically, it means a big old ideological shift wherever you sit in the spectrum, because if you have a tendency towards the right wing and towards kind of free markets, you also have to deal with probably quite a bit of state intervention and to set the frameworks up to kind of invest in technologies because we're changing the economy. And if you're on the left, then you also have to accept in the time that we've got that private industry and private capital are going to be the thing that really drives this. And so it's kind of challenging politically on all fronts. And then on top of that, it's a cross-economy shift. And I sometimes think that government hasn't really grasped the scale of it and how net zero kind of underpins everything else we're trying to do. And so what that suggests is it not being a responsibility that just is confined to BEIS, and not requiring BEIS to have to be the ones to join up everyone else in government, but to make it a central responsibility of government in terms of policy planning, and that suggests the Cabinet Office or a kind of central government department. And the other thing it suggests is the way we think about and evaluate our fiscal decisions has to change too. And just as an example, the current Green Book does not allow us to cost in properly co-benefits or externalities or look broadly about policy. And you know, that means that in the climate change space, we don't properly capture the impacts of climate change that are coming for us when we think about the economy. So business as usual always looks like a good idea. And someone put it in the sidebar, you know, this is just a cost to consumers to decarbonise, when the reality is it's an investment to stop costs the economy in the long run. Our financial mechanisms don't allow that kind of thinking. And the second thing on energy in particular is it prevents us being truly imaginative. So one of the most interesting bits of policy I can think of is, and I talk about it a lot, there was a trial of rolling out efficient boilers for energy efficiency measures in Sunderland that utilised the NHS commissioning budgets to do it. And the reason was that by investing in people's homes, people at risk of respiratory illnesses were ending up in hospital less and saving the NHS money. But when we look at the Green Book, it's almost impossible to do that kind of cross-economy calculation on the ledger. And so that suggests we need to change our economic thinking. At high level, I think a net zero test across every single policy decision would help the Treasury think about decarbonisation.
Thank you. So I just refer the same question back to Keith in case he wishes to comment on Emma's.
So look, I'll just pick up on a couple of things. I agree with everything Emma said. I think she's hit all the right points in there. I mean, my kind of engineering and academic colleagues, they always talk about a systems approach, and I mean, I have to admit, I used to say, "Well, God, don't start complicating life. What the hell do you mean by a systems approach, for the love of God?" But I have to pay due respect. And they're right. Okay, is that this is an entire system, and you need to think about it as an entire system. And I think what Emma has highlighted fantastically is, what sits underneath all of those ambitious targets doesn't run like an integrated system, and that's part of what we need to fix. Look, the upside, the advantage we have is that we all want the same thing. So we all want net zero by 2050. We all want the 2030 target for EVs, etc., etc. So at least we all know what we're trying to achieve, and it's just about how do you join those bits back up together and turn it into an actual system to get the decisions flowing through, the strategy flowing through, the delivery flowing through. But at least we're all trying to head in the same direction, which is really, really helpful. And I think the thing we need to accept in doing this is we are going to make some mistakes. And we just need to get over that, and we just need to accept it, okay? But if we map out and plan it out properly, what we won't do is we won't kill off good ideas that can still come. So heat to me is a great example of this, which is, right now we can start to electrify the heat system because we have the technology available for us, okay? Now, that doesn't mean hydrogen never has a role to play in heat. So yes, let's look at hydrogen, let's develop hydrogen solutions, and as and when we know the answer, and as and when they can come along, we'll play them back into the system, okay? But you don't stop and wait. You can't afford to stop and wait. We need to keep moving the whole time, and you can say the same, and we've seen the same in the past, with renewables, from onshore wind to offshore wind, etc. The fact we ploughed ahead with onshore wind hasn't stopped us doing offshore wind. It's not stopped us using solar technology. It's not stopped us using and bringing batteries onto the system. We keep developing, keep moving, and keep shifting, and the new technology keeps coming along to help us. But to me, the most critical, important statement that came out in that first Committee on Climate Change report way back in, it was over a year ago now, was that it was the phrase that said, we have all of the technology available to us today to deliver net zero. There are no waiting excuses. There's no technology excuses. You get on and you do it now, and you start delivering it now. And that's where we need to get all of our processes focused.
Thank you, Keith. While I have you, John Barton has issued a minor challenge to what you said earlier on. I'd quite like to repeat it for you. Keith says he doesn't want government money, but the investments are so large long-term and all upfront costs that surely government is the right agency to invest. The sovereign green bond is absolutely right. Many governments now have sovereign wealth funds. It makes sense. Only governments can access the patient capital. You get the message, Keith. How do you respond?
It's fine. You can do things in different way. Right now, if I'm looking at what needs to happen to the transmission distribution system, if I'm looking at the additional investment we need to make in renewables, if I'm looking at what we need to do in terms of EV infrastructure, my view is why would you want to plough government resources and government money into it? If you want to use government resources and government money, do it to help the new stuff, do it to help to create the markets. So I think right now, probably to kickstart the hydrogen economy, you need some government funding and some government support to get it kickstarted. To kickstart the heat network economy, as well as the 600,000 target, you need to create a framework and maybe a little bit of government support and money. But once the technologies are up and running, why the hell would you bother with government money? It's just, to me, it's a complete waste of government resource. There's plenty of funding out there. And in terms of all of the upfront costs, there is, you look at where offshore wind is now. There are infrastructure funds investing in offshore projects before anything's put in the seabed. They are viewed as bog standard infrastructure assets. Now, there are engineers who are probably jumping off the top of the bloody building in here because they'll tell you how complicated they are. But in the world of finance and funding, they don't think it's complicated at all. They think it's a perfectly safe investment and a perfectly safe asset, and the money will flood into them. You don't need government money to do that. So don't waste government money doing it. Put the government money where it's needed and where it adds greatest benefit. And that will always be my argument. And I think you look at, in terms of the upfront costs and in terms of the citizen, the consumer at the end of it, which is a massively relevant part of the conversation. But if you create the right frameworks, you spread the cost. Yes, we need to invest billions, and people talk about the most fanciful, ununderstandable numbers in terms of how many bloody zeros come at the end of them that don't really make sense to individuals. Okay, but you look at all of those billions that need to go into the network over the next few years, and the additional cost. Our own, as a company, plan for the network and the additional $1 billion to $1.5 billion of investment we've said we could put into the network over that period of time. Because of the way we invest it and because of the way the regulatory system works, it ends up being converted to a figure of less than 90 pence per customer per year. And the feedback and the engagement we've done with all of our stakeholders is overwhelmingly, the answer comes back, that's good value for money. We want that to happen because we want to tackle climate change. So you can minimize the cost to the end consumer, to the citizen, and that's what we need to focus on. And to me, that's the same for EVs, and it's the same for heat and all of the other stuff we need to do, but get the mechanisms to drive down the impact so the cost doesn't become a barrier to customers making a choice.
Keith, that's a very clear answer, and I'm sure that John will agree that you directly responded to his challenge. I just want to move back to Emma now. Emma, I don't know whether you've seen Paul's question. I'll read it verbatim. Quotas, targets, interventions or ambitions, question mark. Which work best for UK jobs and for the diversity you both have talked about, but you in particular?
All of the above, just to kind of do the lazy out. I mean, it's similar to what Keith is saying on what do you need to do net zero? It's like every tool in the box and every mechanism available, and with diversity and kind of with the workforce, it's both soft tools and hard ones. In terms of, but I'll just kind of tell you a story about my own experience. I'm 10 years into work, and is that right? Yeah, 10 years in. And when I graduated as a young woman coming into the energy industry, and it was kind of conspicuous that we weren't terribly gender balanced, one of my bosses said, well, there's mentoring and there's kind of things available to help you progress, and you're talented and we want to help you in that way. And that was the kind of route through to broadening out diversity then, a softer approach, kind of, things in organisation. And at the time, there was a debate on quotas going on, and it was seen as kind of too hard a measure, and that we do it, through other means. I'm now still relatively unusual to be in my post, and when I talk to the 23, 24-year-olds who work for me, they just expect there to be quotas because they don't want to hear the same thing that I heard. There has been some change, but they want it faster. And so they are much harder about the sorts of things they want. So I think that is you know, coming for industries of all kinds, and it's really welcome that the energy industry has been so proactive on that front, and you know, we've seen that targets can work. The one thing I would say is you do need the policies to underpin it. So, you know, in terms of ways of working, you know, like flexible working is a good example of something that might broaden out diversity in our offices and so on. But also at a government level, it's no good setting targets for kind of wanting 60% of your workforce, which will largely be based on kind of with experienced STEM skilled professionals, to be, you know, diverse if those individuals coming out of apprenticeships or coming out of school or coming out of university aren't diverse. So, you know, we need to have policies in place, not just for industry, but we need mechanisms and policies in place at a government level to help bring talent through. So, you know, it's all of the above. But I will say, I think, you know, just like on everything else, there is pressure on us to really accelerate the change now. And it's just expected from the next generation coming through that we will be serious about it.
Indeed, you must be right on that. Absolutely right. I guess we're coming near the end of our allotted time, and I've got one final question for you both, but I'd quite like to combine it with any closing remarks you'd like to make before we close the session. The question, which I'd like you to cover at the same time, and we'll start with Anna and then go back to Keith, is both of you talked about the 10-point plan and how pleased you were with it, how ambitious you were with it. The question is there anything you would have wanted to see in the 10-point plan that wasn't there that you would like to make a bid for, to pitch another, an 11-point plan? What would it be? But please say anything you wish to in closing about your reflections on the discussions today. Emma first.
Right. There's some detailed stuff, as Keith said, the kind of nuts and bolts of boring regulation that I would like to see and hope for in the energy white paper, actually. And you know, an example of a policy idea or a fiscal incentive that was missing is something around EV demand. So helping consumers buy EVs, not just looking at the kind of charging network that supports them, or a kind of target for phase out. So you know, some kind of fiscal offer there. And then, as I said, on building, you know, heat and buildings are so complex as a policy area, but the decarbonisation challenge for the UK is critical, and we need to crack on with heat decarbonisation, and that will also mean making our buildings energy efficient. And as I said, I'd quite like to see a much bigger, bolder ambition in that space, which is commensurate with the scale of the problem. And there was some great stuff about heat pumps in the 10-point plan, and there's hydrogen in the 10-point plan, and there's energy efficiency a bit in the 10-point plan, but like joining it all up into something which is, you know, an infrastructure sized project, I think is important. And lastly, the punt I would really make comes back to this how we measure and test policy thing, because as Keith and as the Minister said, net zero is reality, climate change is reality, the impacts are coming for us, we don't have much time. And we need to crystallise the scale of the opportunity and the challenge for government in how we think about and evaluate policy. And for me, that means some of this stuff about a net zero test or machinery of government changes, which can drive the ambition that's in the 10-point plan or in kind of pockets in Whitehall, right the way through Whitehall. And, you know, speaking with Treasury recently, I think even they would welcome that, you know, kind of change to their ways of thinking. We speak to the regulator the same. We just need to design our governance systems for the problem at hand.
Thank you very much, Emma, and thank you for taking part. Keith, so the question that is still outstanding is, what's the 11th point on the plan, and any closing remarks from you?
Fine, so I'll just briefly, because I know we're short of time. There is no 11th point. I wouldn't add anything else in the 10-point plan. All the other stuff I'm looking for and asking for, I think, comes in the white paper, you know, around the systems approach, around the frameworks, around the infrastructure investment, around regulatory processes. That should all come out through the white paper, and then all of the work that comes in the back of the white paper. So I wouldn't add, or I don't think there's anything particularly missing from the 10-point plan. My ending message, summary message is optimism. Okay, is let's go have our Christmas holiday and we come back in the new year optimistic, in a delivery focus, and we're getting the hell on with it and we deliver it. And anybody involved in this industry needs to come back into 2021 understanding we are the future of this country. We are central to everything that goes on in this country going forward, from the perspective of investment, economic recovery, jobs, apprenticeship opportunities, training opportunities, supply chain opportunities, and driving the UK economy forward for the next 20, 30, 40 years. That's a bloody good place to be, and we should be happy about it.
Keith, that's an excellent point on which to finish the debate. I'm really struck by the passion of both of you and the optimism, as you put it, in looking forward to the delivery, the confidence in your delivery of these targets. So thank you both very much indeed. I've got two things to say in closing for everybody. And the first is to make sure that people have in their diaries our future dates. We have 4 future debates planned. As I said to the Minister, the first one is going to be focused on the white paper. We'll obviously choose the specific focus within the white paper after it's published and we see what it says. I wrote down that we would be inviting the Minister. I think we've already done that, and I think he's already accepted, actually. So the date is the 15th of April. We're also inviting the CEO of Ofgem, as we're pretty sure that they will be important in the context of the white paper as well. We're planning that as a virtual event on the 15th of April. The next one we're clear about is on the 17th of June, which is the development of low carbon regional industrial clusters. So expect to be invited representatives from Teesside, Humberside, Moorside, possibly other sides as well. And actually, that kind of debate is probably better done virtually because it ensures we can have direct contributions from those regions. On the 16th of September, we hope we're going to be able to have a physical meeting. That's our plan. And because September is in advance of COP26, taking part in the country in which Keith resides, we want to devise a programme that's strongly related to COP26. And on the 2nd of December, that's for the diary, subject not yet defined. So the 4 dates are the 15th of April, the 17th of June, the 16th of September, and the 2nd of December. So in closing, once again, thank you all for attending. Thank particularly our speakers, including the Minister, for making this a really worthwhile and interesting occasion. And I hope to see you on the 15th of April on the next occasion. Please, in closing, I think it pops up automatically, provide some feedback in the form that the Energy Institute have put out. So thank you all very much and goodbye for now. Have a great Christmas. Goodbye.
Cheers. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.